Geschichte, Yizkor, historia. Prolonged reflection shows that our so-called concepts or ideas are extremely vague. So here in Heidegger speaks of the vagueness of the everyday, which is still a factum, is still as it is, and we can still investigate it, even though we can't. Even though we struggle to maintain any speech that holds it consistently above that bared level that comes shuffling ex tempore before us and before our ability to recall the concepts that we've gained command of. So I was thinking in the context of this debate between Helena Rosenblatt and many of the objections which seem to spring to mind in her account were answered or were taken up under the banner of somebody called Klein, Dan Klein, I think his name is. But these are species of concrete examples of the decay of the systems of science that we've inherited. So, one, there's unclarity about what history is supposed to mean, so that we can remember. This seems to be missing. So from both of these so-called historians is the theory of what actually history is, because they apparently totally take it for granted, or not totally, because Rosenblatt states, I think a historian should not be somebody who presents a definition of what something is. So liberalism is supposedly the thing under investigation, and then according to their own definition searches into it. This she calls subjective. She proposes instead, she says, if we just look at when the word's used and how it was used and when real political movements are using, this is supposedly history. This is totally arbitrary. And it's arbitrary because either liberalism means something, or we're just looking at incidences of when the word was used, and the words are symbols, and we would need some coherent theory of how language operates. So words are symbols that are supposedly symbolizing something. So just to know that liberalism was used won't help us to know it's symbolizing the thing, the meaning liberalism, because any other set of syntagm or set of symbols could be thrown together and point to that same thing. Just the symbol or the signs, as it were, according to the leading theories of how language works, wouldn't be enough. But we don't have a theory of language here, but we're told somehow that we can just look at when it's used. So we could say what we have is instead this theory that there's something like the kind of interpretation the versions of interpretation one gets with respect to the Constitution, and then there's a question, a certain clause appears, and then the question is, do we inquire into current lexicons to answer the question of what does this mean? Of course not. But then there's this question, do we try to ask what did the person that wrote that intend by it? Or do we rather ask what do the lexicons at the time that it was written say it means to just anyone, which also is inadequate because this is, of course, legalese, and this is, we could suppose there's some technical terms such as I think recently has been coming up this term of who's an officer of the United States and other things of this kind. There's all kinds of technical terms in the text. Do we need some kind of theory like this if we're going to say so that what she's really doing is telling us we should choose the path of interpretation of text that we have that says Madame de Stael has used the word here, and we can infer what she meant by it through interpreting certain passages in her books or in her private correspondence or etc. And then different schools would crop up, would put different weight on different interpretations of the text and on different rules about how to interpret. And this would become, after a fashion, objective because it would be rules for acceptance by a certain community of which would publish peer-reviewed journals. And they would say, so for instance, you could imagine that one would say, maybe there would be two schools. One would put more weight on private correspondence, and the other would put more weight on her printed work, which was based on reflection and revisal, and was a more representative of her studied view on the matter. We don't have a lot of theory then in this Rosenblatt saying that we're going to just look at what people say and what the real political usage is. So another issue here is historia itself is a very special, very important concept in Greek thinking. So, but then we ask, how can it be only in Greek thinking, and there is no word for history either in German or in Hebrew. Instead, we had this word. We have Geschichte in German, and we have Yizkor in Hebrew. So these are similar, but they're not the same word. And actually, in Hebrew, they use the word historia, the Greek word, and they also use it in German, or a similar form of it. But Geschichte really means story, or something like saga of the people, or something closer to memory. And then Yizkor means more directly memory or memorial. This is how we remember people. It's a more, but clearly historia is a special category of the Greeks. But then, true, one could ask, like, how much did it change when Aristotle got his hands on it and put it into a metaphysical system which declared there's this difference between historia, investigation, going out and looking at things, or investigating texts of the past or what people say. Yeah, so a special kind of investigation that takes place in the present, historia, where as against the investigation of philosophy, or as against, as Aristotle famously puts it, that poetic and say more about the universal and the historical or sheerly individual event. So this glosses that there's a lot of theory behind the idea of historia in the tradition, and that it has come over and become a word appended onto a number of other languages, including German and Hebrew, in addition to their, as it were, more primordial words, Geschichte and Yizkor, which seem to be slightly different in meaning in the respective peoples. Um, okay, so this is just a suggestion about how we can see, somewhat thrillingly in a way, but also it's very pathetic, the most theoretical difficulties coming over and like termites eating away at the wood of the very concrete happenings in these discussions. Okay, you could say it's a scholarly discussion, but it makes a big difference because Rosenblatt, even though she's largely like taking over Catholic things Catholics have been saying anyway for a long time about her way of treating history, within the university, it is displaced the view that keeps claiming Locke is the first liberal, which apparently Dan Klein says really evolved in the World War II period in order to be able to positively tell people who. So like in World War I, probably people just were like didn't ask that many questions and they just went. But by World War II, people were largely like a lot more informed and they kind of wanted some principle. And then the notion is they came up with saying there's all these principles adduced at the beginning of our current order, which is liberalism, and we can go to Adam Smith and to John Locke and they'll tell us what they are, and then they tell the troops this and so on. And so the idea is that for a long time Locke was said originally for that reason, and later because academics just kind of picked up on it, to be the beginning of liberalism. I think Dugin also understands it this way, but the reason Dugin does that is because he's saying, here's how my enemy, the sick dragon, America, is understanding it. Here's how its son Biden is the son of the sick dragon. Biden is understanding it, and I have to understand it that way because I'm in a way in this orbit of this dragon that's in the cosmos, and I'm part of the cosmos. So it's like that view is then displaced by this Rosenblatt view, but it's not simply something that happens in only that theater where they're having a little debate and there's like 30 academics sitting there, but is also immediately you could see how it changes what Dugin thinks, and then how it changes what people that are currently in all these think tanks that are giving advice to the permanent bureaucracy in the American government of how to act. So like the Atlantic Council and Rand Corporation, and even to some extent this, I think most of them are pretty bad. The Hoover Institute people, they're pretty clueless. There was a good thing actually though, I think, with the Stephen Kotkin. Even though I disapprove of him largely, I thought at least he intervened a little. I did think that it was good that he intervened against their total Republican agenda thing. Although I wouldn't count, maybe McMaster's I wouldn't count as one of them, but this total pro-Trump type of thing. And then saying that there's factors that affect the order that is not party particular, is that both parties are affected by them. I think that's a more effective way of analyzing the system, even if you want to take, as Kotkin apparently does, more of a Robert Kagan and more of a realist view, which I prescribe because I think it's unbalanced. Also because I think it's ultimately feeble, because the greater the desire for an adequate understanding of the situation gets among people. Like in World War I, people didn't care. World War II, they needed something. Now it's getting to be a higher notch. The more that happens, the more we have to negotiate at this level that Dugin is bringing the global discussion to.